Welcome to the Sales Compensation Show, where we share the latest sales performance insights through in-depth discussion with experts. Season 3 of our show is your backstage pass to discovering how today's most successful sales and revenue ops teams support go-to-market strategy and improve sales performance. Plus, we'll explore what we can learn about incentives from different industries more broadly. Subscribe to hear how leaders are unlocking new growth, implementing the latest compensation trends, and their priorities for improving go-to-market performance. I'm your host, CEO of Form AI, Nabil Alzam. Saxton Archer is a seasoned professional with a rich background in the technology sector. He has held pivotal roles at leading companies including Stripe, Twilio, Calibra, and others. He's worked in roles including sales operations, and more importantly, got his start, as we'll discuss, as a sales development representative, giving him plenty of insight and empathy for the role he works to shape behavior for now. I'm so pleased to chat with Saxton, and I think you'll love our conversation. Saxton, welcome to the show. We're so excited to have you on today. And just to dive right in, I think you've had this very storied career in sales compensation. Would love to just hear you share your journey and ultimately kind of what led you here, because sales comp is one of those things where you don't wake up as a 5-year-old thinking that's what you're going to do when you grow up.
Yeah, this wasn't what I dreamed I would be doing in my career, when I was a little kid, but very happy where I'm at. And, I started out in sales actually, and I think that's why this journey has led me here.
I love that because you can empathize with the role.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And I can always use that when I'm having conversations with salespeople. I'm like, I was in your shoes. So I think it is helpful. Yeah, I started out as an SDR in inside sales. I was selling like crime analytics software for Motorola solutions to like police and sheriff's departments. So I started out in that, and I very quickly realized a quota role, holding a quota, was not necessarily what I wanted to be doing. But I gained a lot of experience there and kind of realized I did want to stay within the sales environment. I studied economics and I knew I wanted to get into more analytics. So it was a very easy transition to go from SDR inside sales to like a sales operations analyst, having that sales experience. And so I did that for a little bit. I was doing like RFP helping others, salespeople with that. And then, as most of us, I just fell into sales comp. They needed someone to kind of take over sales compensation. I had no idea what I was doing, but I learned a lot. I actually was able to learn most of my basic knowledge about sales compensation from our CFO at the time. And he was highly involved in the commissions. This was at PlanView, and learned a lot there. Realized pretty quickly this is something I was good at and I actually enjoy doing. And then from there, I mean, if you look at my resume, I'm a serial job hopper, I would say. But it's because I've been provided a lot of opportunities. And I think that's been the biggest surprise within sales compensation, is how much opportunity there is out there for people who really stick with it and hone their skills within this function.
Yeah. I mean, it touches so many different parts of the organization, right? Like, you get to interact with the CFOs, with the CROs, the HR leadership in a way. So kind of, it's cross-functional. It's a very compelling role there. I guess it makes up for all the thanklessness of the role sometimes.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's a high visibility role, which I enjoy, but yeah, it is thankless at times, but also there's these special moments where you do get to have these interactions with sales reps and sales leaders where they're just really excited and really happy about the work that you're doing. When you get into like the planning processes, which I'm deep in right now, those are the exciting moments for me, because it's like I can put something in front of people that I think really gets the organization excited for the new year. And so that's kind of where we're at now. And that's the part of this job that I really enjoy. There are bad parts about it, but there's bad parts of every job.
Yeah, 100%. And I mean, it's interesting because your perspective, just to dive back into kind of your career start, to me, the customer that you serve as a company defines the culture in a lot of ways. And like for us, we work with sales comp and sales ops. And so our culture is aligned to that in the way that we think entirely across the company. I imagine back in your days of working in Motorola and selling to, police and institutions similar to that. I'm curious, not just in that specific role, but as you like seen sales comp and sales organizations across different customers, like how has that impacted actually the way that you've operated within each of these organizations?
Yeah. I mean, SOCI is, I guess, the seventh company I've been doing sales compensation at. So And I've been a part of like HR organizations. I've been a part of RevOps. I've been a part of finance. And I think that culturally being a part of each of those organizations is very different. And the goals within those functions are very different. So it's been interesting. I really enjoy being a part of RevOps. I think that's the most aligned with what sales compensation is trying to do.
I find the speed is much faster too. Like decisions get made more alignment.
Yes, yes, yes. Like HR, no offense to any HR professionals out there. It is so slow. Like,
Well, I mean,
and
it's risk mitigation versus hunger for revenue, right? And
yes,
you typically find that when it's an HR, it's a little bit more, it's a little safer, right? There, all the rules are being followed and set up, but it comes at a cost, I think, at some point. Yeah.
yeah. But I love that question about culture because every company's culture is very different and it does affect, the objectives you have as a sales comp professional and like in the design process, what you're trying to accomplish. Because if there's cultural issues that are stopping you from doing the things you really want to do, you have to be adaptable and you have to plan around that. And so every single company is going to have those cultural things that they're trying to work through that you then have to plan around. So it's another interesting part about the job that I wasn't expecting when I first got into this.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's the cultural element is at the end of the day, like the way that you communicate plans, the way that you get buy-in, the way that you effectively engage and interact with all the different stakeholders, which is so inherent to sales comp. I guess maybe that kind of leads into the next question I have, which is like, if you think about sales comp across the seven, companies you've done this at, what makes it so inherently political, or maybe using a different word, politically charged?
Money. I mean, at the end of the day, it's about money and it's not a little bit of money. Like commissions are a pretty large budget line item. And so when you have expenses that are that large and unpredictable, it's one of the most unpredictable expenses that you have as well. Inherently, there's a lot of people that want to have their hands in that and then they have an invested interest in that as well. So it's charged and money is also emotional. Especially when it comes to your own money and what you're making. So I think that's the main reason why it's so charged all the time is, yeah, I guess when you're dealing with
Man,
people's money, it's
it's spot on. Like it's one of those things where it's like, no one wants to talk about money. Like, among whether it's among friends, among family, among
yeah,
coworkers or colleagues or people that report to you, like it's literally the last conversation you want to have. The part that resonates to me is like you look at how quickly sales managers drop the sales comp conversation. Like the biggest surprise to me is that you'll interview a rep and it's 6 months, 8 months into the year after a new plan's rolled out. And you're like, wait, you still don't understand this comp plan? Like, how is that possible? And then you reverse and you kind of go back and dissect what happened. And it's like, new plan rolled out. The manager spent literally a hot minute messaging it. Not to their fault. It's because it's a weird topic to talk about. Like, it's someone's pay. I don't want to, yeah, there's a lot of elements about it. And then for finance,
it's funny you bring that up because I feel like since getting into sales compensation, I'm a big proponent of talking about like my own finances, my own money, and I'm encouraging like friends and family and stuff to like talk about that more because I think the more we talk about that, the more informed we are about our own situation as well as others. And I think you're absolutely right. If people are not comfortable having those conversations, that's why they're not happening internally within these organizations.
yeah,
Um, we'll probably get into it later, but like I think enablement on plans is such an important part of sales compensation and making sure that you're doing the steps to educate both sales leaders and sales reps about these plans because a sales compensation plan is worthless if a rep doesn't understand it. Like if they don't know what they're working towards, if they don't know how to make the most money they can possibly make on this plan, why do we do all this work to begin with? So yeah, I'm a huge, huge proponent of enablement when it comes to sales compensation plans. And I think anyone that's in this role or function, that has to be a top priority.
100%. Yeah. And I think getting there is the hardest part and kind of sometimes leads to these plans that are very difficult to enable across organizations. But to tap back into like the political, element of this, I think again, across the seven organizations you've worked with, are there any specific conflicts or pain points that you see repeatedly?
Yeah, I would say balancing like solving issues within the comp plan versus, let's say, like rep performance management. I have consistently in every organization dealt with the conflict of like, what can we actually solve within the comp plan and what should be solved elsewhere? And everyone has different opinions about what that is. And so that to me has been the most consistent issue that I deal with. And you have to be very creative in the way that you think about everyone's different objectives and how to actually solve those and what should actually be included in the compensation plan and what should be managed with like a rep performance plan or any type of, rep performance management outside of that. And so even at SOCI, I'm dealing with that, trying to get people to understand we can't use a compensation plan as like our all-encompassing solving problem. There are some problems out there that can't be solved with a comp plan.
Yeah, 100%. It's a toolkit that you have that will solve a handful of problems at a time or steer.
Highest priority and biggest problems about these little problems, let's figure that out somewhere else.
Yeah, exactly. And this goes back to kind of the best practices. I know we touched on this prior, but I would say this one is a best practice for a good reason. Like you can't measure or motivate more than 3 to 4 key metrics within a comp plan. Otherwise, you diminish the value and the weight of any single metric. And I think this goes back to use those wisely and, which ones do you tackle? I mean, it's a very interesting point because I think now that you say that, I see this a lot as well. And you have to balance across all the different stakeholders. They all have a desire to solve a problem. It might not all be aligned, right? Think about finance might be focused on discounting levels. Sales is focused on driving a certain metric that it's going to matter to their top line numbers. Obviously, everyone's aligned, but at the end of the day, everyone has their own sub initiatives or sub metrics that they're personally measured on within their departments. So how do you ensure that across all these different stakeholders, they feel heard, but you're still advocating for that best plan, the best incentives to ultimately get to the better outcome for the business?
Yeah, it's hard. This is one of the hardest parts of the job. Well, first off, I like to have, when we start the process for the new year, I like to have meetings with each of these stakeholders separately. I think that's helpful for them to express what's important to them, what their goals are for the next year. And especially in that initial meeting, I don't shut anything down. Like, I think it's really important to hear them out, take notes, make them feel comfortable that there's no bad ideas right now.
I love that. Like divergent thinking and then converge on the idea.
Yes.
Yeah.
Like, even if their idea is completely terrible, just don't show that. Don't let them know that. Tell them, you'll digest it, think through it. And so that's step number one. I would also say after that, coming to the table with your suggestion or your like preference for what the plan should look like is essential. You don't want to come into a meeting with stakeholders where it's just open-ended and they have free reign. The goal of sales compensation is come to the table with something that you want and sell it. And in a way, we have to be salespeople as well. We're selling the plans to stakeholders, we're selling the plans to sales leaders, and we're selling the plans to the rest of the sales organization. So yeah, we're salespeople at the end of the day as well. And come to the table with something that you want and start there. That's my suggestion.
Yeah, I love that. Like, yeah, the best way to navigate competing interests is to sell a vision that you have that kind of addresses everyone, or at least convinces them that you're solving their bigger problem.
Direct people in the way that you want them to go. And if it diverges a little bit, that's fine, but you don't want to leave it completely open for that because it's really hard to reel people back in once they get an idea and they start running with it. Like, you run with your idea first and make them be the ones to kind of bring you back in.
Yeah. And I guess, like, where do you see the most common misstep in solving this specific problem?
I guess after you like bring something to the table, being a little too lenient or like agreeable, especially with like, sales leaders and, sales personalities, there's a reason why they're good at sales. And you give them a little bit of rope and they'll take as much as they can. So I think standing firm in your decisions and helping them understand why this is good for them and why this is the way we should go is extremely important. Like, early in my career, I found myself on calls being kind of like, a sales leader would be like, well, what do you think about this? I think this is a really good idea. Can you like run some analysis on it? And I would just be like, okay, sure. Okay, I'll do that. And I think that just opens up the door for a lot of problems in the future. And so if you come to the table with something you really believe in and you believe is a good path forward, listen to people, but also stand firm in your decisions. I think it's really important.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that a lot. And I think it's interesting because I feel like in my consulting days prior to just doing, sales comm and Informa, we'd have forecasting projects where we'd come in and present kind of a forecast to support a business case for M&A or whatever it is. It's been multiple use cases. And what was interesting I found is if you presented the forecast first and then you go in and you dive into the assumptions, it was always do I like the forecast? Yes, no, for each stakeholder. And then it was the assumptions are either right or they're wrong because they're trying to uncover ways to kind of deviate from the forecast. And so ultimately the best answer was actually walk through and get alignment on the assumptions, the key guiding principles that we used, and then present the forecast at the very end, because then it's very hard to argue. You got commitment on all these assumptions, all these like guiding principles, the constraints that we use to set that. And, as you were walking through this, I think for me, it's almost a similar approach that can be applied to sales comp, where you're coming in, you have the best practices, you have a guidance to that organization. I'm like, this is what can and cannot be sold with sales comp. This is the best practice way to do it. And then, or best practice or the most logical for the business, like whatever you want to, you want to define, getting buy-in on that and then presenting the final results. And I'm curious if that resonates.
Yeah, the guiding principles piece that's literally the title I use on slides as I go through these, and those are the things you align on first. Here's our objectives as a company. Here's the principles we're trying to solve for. And if you present that first, and then you have solutions for those principles, it's really hard for someone to like go way left field and try something new. Like we've all aligned on this. And so every single meeting I have with any type of leader, with whether it be AEs, CSMs, SDRs, any type of leaders within those organizations, no matter how many times they've seen the guiding principles, I always start the call off with those as a gentle reminder. Here's what we're trying to solve. And I think it's been super helpful for me because it's really hard to argue
Yep.
things when everyone's already aligned on those.
Yeah, 100%. So just to kind of bring this to life, do you have any war stories or, crazy moments where you've had to navigate that you're comfortable sharing? And, I feel like it's always best to learn from experience.
Yeah, I'm not gonna like say which company or who. I would say like my biggest war is usually with finance, like trying to put a plan together that's highly rewarding for top performers, but will make finance happy as well is always a battle. And so one of my experiences is I had in my opinion, a great plan. I'd run this by so many other people, and we got to the point where we had to run it up the chain to the CFO, right? And we got to that point, and most of the things were just nixed immediately because they were under the impression that we didn't have budget for it. This was going to be too costly, even though we'd modeled out what this ideally would look like. And so through that, I learned to get like C-suite involvement much earlier, because at the end of the day, they're going to have to approve whatever you're presenting. And so don't go through all of that work without having their input towards the beginning, or else, it was a waste of multiple weeks for me having to start over at that point. So I'm of the opinion that having, C-suite involvement relatively early is actually good. And having their opinion, understanding where their head is at, is going to only help you to design something that's going to be good for everyone. And so that's what I did here at SOCI for this planning period for 2025. And this is the earliest I've ever gotten approved plans down the line. So it worked. I can't suggest that enough.
Yeah. It's interesting. It's spot on because it's like you want that C-suite input early because at the end of the day, sales comp is just an optimization problem. Like
Yeah.
if you pull a lever over here, you're taking something away over here. Back to you can only incentivize 2, 3, at most 4 metrics.
Yep.
And so what I've seen work very well is to go to each of the different stakeholders. I mean, finance is a perfect example because they can be absolutely a blocker and it's a very high risk, second largest cost center on average for most organizations. And so you go in and it's basically saying, I need these inputs, right? What are the constraints I have to work with from a cost perspective? What are the inputs that are going to constrain my optimization? And if you get that approval early, then any result that you come within that spectrum, in theory, should be pre-approved. Not to say it's perfect, and you're going to always run into, last minute challenges, hurdles, but at least you kind of prevent or minimize the risk of what I could imagine was massively painful after weeks of grinding through the modeling to get to an axe plan. But yeah.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. That's exactly how I felt. And like now that I've seen it in action and work finally from here on out, that their involvement I'll have pretty early in the process.
And it's impactful to them, right? Like if you think about it, like the things that you're gonna do, I mean, this is literally steering the ship at the most granular level for revenue, which is important to every executive in the organization. If done right, and I think I like, I like the approach that you said earlier on like coming in with a direction. Of course, you're gonna collect feedback across all the board, but like, yeah, leading that charge is quite important. So you bring in all these different stakeholders, you get this alignment. I mean, I think sales comp, and this is where the complexity really lies, is it's not just done as soon as you get to this kind of aligned comp plan. You need to, there's all this alignment even downstream. How do you navigate the messaging? When do you announce it? SKO, not SKO. Like who's going to be in charge of the change management? All the stakeholders that still have a different perspective. HR is going to want to play it very, very safe. HR legal,
Yep.
right? Finance wants to make sure that, it's as safe as possible from a quota or metric perspective. And then sales wants it out as fast as possible so their team can get reoriented and out the door. So I'm curious, when you think about alignment post decision of plan, how do you approach that?
Yeah, I really like this question. So from a like communication standpoint, I think it's really important once you have plans finalized. Ideally, it's going to be before the year starts. I've been at places where that wasn't the case.
Surprises you, it's a lot more than it should be.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And then you get into like legalities of that and there's a lot of gray area there. But, assuming you have plans finalized with the necessary stakeholders, at least by the end of the last month of the year or whatever your fiscal year or calendar year is, I think it's really important to communicate that out to sales leaders and sales reps before the next year starts, especially if you're on a typical calendar year. Going into the new year with that information of exactly what you're working towards is really important.
Yeah.
I never want to put reps in a situation where they're coming into a new year and they have no idea what their targets are or what their comp plans are going to look like. And you don't have to give them the nitty-gritty details of every single part of the comp plan. Just give them the general high level. Here's your components.
Yeah.
Here's what you're working toward.
This is what matters. Yeah.
Yeah. And if you can, give them a target. If they have quotas, give them a high level target. So that's key, in my opinion, is getting that in front of them before the year begins. Now, that doesn't mean you need to have comp plans out to them. I've never had comp plans out to people before the year starts. Never, in all 7 companies.
Yeah.
So
Which I think that makes sense because in theory, you're still working on the comp plan that you're on until it's done. But shortly thereafter, it should be out. Yes.
And there's another piece of this that you have to find that happy balance of you want people to close the year out strong. And if your plans for next year are more lucrative, you don't want people holding deals. So you have to be aware of that. And so as you communicate out these changes, maybe give them the pieces that they need, but don't give them the details that might cause them to hold anything back until the next year. So that's key number 1, comp plans, the actual documents. If you can get that out by like an RKO or somewhere pretty soon after the year begins, I think that's ideal. And then I think the rest of it, HR, legal, they're really involved in like the terms and conditions aspects that I believe you can really start that before even the plans have been finalized. A lot of those details don't really rely on the component aspects. And so the biggest piece communication wise is to the sales organization itself early. And then the rest of these stakeholders can usually be done, further into the Q1 of the next year. Finance obviously is going to want to know for budgeting purposes. And, I'm usually working with them in tandem as we're
Yeah.
designing the plans themselves. And then after that, it's the operational aspects of if you have a sales compensation tool, getting the plans built into those in time to have their first statements ready. And sometimes that's the most work, like getting that piece done. Yeah, I think that's most of the details around.
Yeah. On the budgeting side, because I think it's an important one to finance. But the interesting piece is if sales comp owns or is a big part of the quota setting process, I feel like it's much easier. I'm curious how you manage doing the financial modeling and budgeting when quota setting sits outside of your purview
Yeah.
and quotas have such a massive impact. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, it does sit outside of my purview at the moment. I would love to take on that piece as well because I think it is so closely aligned with sales compensation. I mean, you ask any sales comp professional, I would say 30% of the questions they get, maybe that's too high, but around that percentage is around quotas and like, why is my quota this? How has that impacted? Things like that. So quota setting is so closely aligned with sales compensation, and you can't get a lot of the main points of a sales compensation plan until you have those quotas. So working with the broader RevOps team, and I would even suggest trying to have input into those quotas, not necessarily what they are, but the timelines of when those are needed. I think it's really important for those other groups within RevOps to understand when these are needed from a sales comp perspective, because I think the quota setting process could really drag on if it's let go. And then, yeah, budgeting, I think it depends on the organization, the actual modeling out of commissions and what that's going to look like within the year. If you have a robust sales comp team, I think that does typically fall under a sales compensation team. If it's just one or two of you, a lot of times that will fall to like the finance team with inputs from you. I think it just depends on where the skill sets lie within the team. If finance has been doing this and it has a good pulse on it, let them do it.
Yeah.
But if you're the most closely aligned with, the capacity plan, things like that, then yeah, I think a sales compensation team should be modeling those out, and you understand the plans the best. So you're going to know the minute details of what may change the payouts drastically.
Exactly. What are the biggest levers of risk? I mean, this is the interesting piece of like the closer you are to, like in my mind, doing pay curves outside of understanding where the biggest risk you have for quota accuracy for each of those metrics is very difficult to do because that's where you get to dangerous, like, oh yeah, we forecasted this and we were 20% over budget in comp, which is a disaster when you think about the size of the budget that sits there. But if you work collaboratively with whoever's doing quotas to understand your kind of variability or risk factor at a metric by metric level, then you end up kind of mitigating. And then I agree with your point of like in sales comp, you tend to understand, okay, this metric could either like blow out of the water or not land at all, and then assess the risk. How do you
Pay curves are easy. Pay curves are easy, like, right? So I think you're completely right. If quotas are not set properly or aligned, that's when you're going to have risk of blowing your budget out of the water. Because if quotas are set properly, there shouldn't be any reason why the commission budget is that far off.
And you could be really good at forecasting the overall number, but it's actually getting the quotas right at the rep level. Because if you have half the team get 150% attainment and half the team get 50, okay, sure, the business hits the budget, but you now just spent probably 20 or 30% more on variable comp than you should have. And that's the real risk. So yeah, and highlighting that, especially when it's a new metric, that's kind of like one of the biggest risk factors that you want to call out anytime you make a big drastic change to comp is like, we don't have the confidence or potentially don't have the confidence in the attainment levels of this new metric, depending on the quota setting approach is taken.
Yeah, and if you're on an annual plan period, it's risky to put in a metric like that that hasn't been tested, which is why I like to run spiffs on new metrics that we're thinking about.
Right.
That way we can test it out, see if it's working. We ran a spiff in 2024 for like multi-year renewals because we needed people to be focused on that more. It was so successful, we're building it into the standard comp plans for 2025. So I would say if you're wondering about new metrics and how they're going to work, run a spiff, experiment.
Yeah. Yeah. It's great. It's like the best way to learn is through actual results and data and 100%. so far, like in terms of like everything we've covered has been fantastic. I do want to leave time for us to jump into our next segment, which is the hot seat, just to provide the context. And I know we talked about this a bit earlier. For me, this segment is just about getting hot takes and kind of contrarian perspectives on different elements within sales comp. And the reason why we're doing this is, to me, we touched on this a little earlier, the concept of best practices is, at the end of the day, we shouldn't be so restricted by or held by these kind of principles that maybe 20 years ago were not the best practices. They've evolved to get to here. And so the way I see it is, if you're passionate about it, if you have a perspective that's different, would love to hear it and want to share it with the audience. And so if you're ready, we'll dive right in.
Yeah, I don't shy away from hot takes even in my everyday life, so I'm ready.
Perfect. Okay, so starting out, what's the most overrated trend in sales comp from your perspective?
Okay. I know the benefits of a consumption-based model. I really do. I see the benefits. I hate it. I hate it. I hate it. I work, Stripe and Twilio were both consumption-based models, and I'm seeing like SaaS companies move towards that model. But like from a sales comp perspective, it is so hard to build plans around that and like really be able to see ahead and how that performance is gonna turn out. So I don't think I've seen a single business that is dealing with consumption-based models where they feel confident about their commission plans and how that's working within that model. So I'm not going to say it's overrated. I understand the benefits of a consumption-based model when it comes to compensating. I don't like it personally.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it just, you elevate the stakes so much. And I think one of the things that we see commonly is, if you're going to go to consumption based, talk about the stakeholders,
Yeah.
like that already, it's a difficult process with the stakeholders that we have. You now expand it to, you need product involvement. You need product data and engagement data at a customer level. You need to understand exactly what the selling motion is post sale, like to a level of detail that you just don't need to have if you're not using consumption. So I agree. I'm actually aligned with you on, it's overrated if you assume that it's going to be a simple transition. Like, if you're going to do this, it has value, but you need to treat it with the level of care it is. It's just like sales activity based incentives.
It's exactly the same. Right. Like pipeline. I hate compensating on pipeline. I think it changes so rapidly. I don't think it's necessarily an accurate depiction of like where the business is. And so that's another metric where I'm just like, I don't personally ever put that into a plan because it's not predictable for us and it changes so much. It's hard to like really compensate on that unless you're taking snapshots within moments of time. And then it's just confusing for the reps at that point.
Yeah. And even, yeah. So this actually was about, you just need to overhaul your entire process. And if you overhaul your entire process, you have better data collection, et cetera, then you could do these things. But to do it without that is yes, very risky.
Yep.
Okay. Follow-up question. Sales, finance, are they ever truly aligned when it comes to sales comp? Or is that just a pipe dream?
I actually do think they are at times. If you have a finance team that realizes if we want to hit our targets, we have to have good incentives in place, I think you can be aligned. Now, do I think there's a lot of finance teams that think that way? No. I think they're more worried about the budget, obviously, and protecting the business with that. I don't know. I think recency bias right now, SOCI, we're aligned. So I'm forgetting all of the other past experiences I've had where we weren't. But yeah, I think it is possible.
Ideally. I mean, yeah. If we think about the overall incentive of getting to revenue growth, I mean, in theory, it should lead to alignment, but it's hard to kind of get out of your bucket or your pool.
Yeah.
So, okay, then follow up on that. C-suite involvement, does it help or does it hurt plan design?
I think we kind of touched on this earlier. I do think C-suite involvement helps. I guess actually, now that I'm thinking about it, they're the final approvers. So yeah, you need to get them involved. Do I think it's helpful when you're in the weeds of the design process and plans? Not always. I think they are sometimes so high up and looking at these objectives from such a high level that it's hard for them to see things from an operational perspective, especially. And that's one of the hardest things I find balancing our objectives with C-suite objectives is, they may have a great idea, but we don't have a way to carry that out right now. It's not operationally possible, and it's not going to be operationally possible to get that ready to go in one quarter. So yeah, that's the hardest part. I think dealing with C-suites is like, great idea, love it. We just can't do it right now, and we're gonna have to think about that in the future and getting them comfortable with that.
Yeah. I mean, I think what you said earlier too is spot on in the sense of you need to sell and navigate this process. And I think like the C-suite involvement is a massive blessing, can be tremendously value add if you get it at the right time, right? They can like push things through, they can advocate for the right thing. But again, they're coming in, they're dealing with a million things. They're coming in for this, one little like slice at moment of time. And if you underutilize that time, if you don't come in with a narrative and a story and then either get their buy-in or get input that is going to help you kind of finalize the constraints of what you're working within, then it's very easy. I've seen it kind of derail and go off course. And then to your point, it's well, maybe there's a lot of nuanced details of why we can't execute on it. The systems aren't there, et cetera, which is the last thing that you kind of want to now derail this conversation on. So I think it's great if it's well run, like bottom up. It could be detrimental and hurt if it's not navigated the right way.
You said exactly what I was gonna follow up with is if you're gonna be working with the C-suite executives, come to the table with data and insights. That's what they want to see. If you're presenting something to them, make sure you have the data and insights to support it as you're selling that to them. That's the best way to get their buy-in.
100%. 100%. You touched on this earlier. So the last question I had for you here, but I think you touched on the consumption-based pricing or consumption-based comp model. So the last question I had here was, what's the one sales comp metric that everyone's obsessed with today, but it's actually not helpful? But I don't know if there's something outside of consumption-based components that you think this also points to.
Yeah. I mean, you kind of touched on it, but I activity-based metrics, I hate. Like that is why someone has a base salary. That is the expectation we have of you to do those activities. And if you're a smart seller, you know those activities will produce sales, you know? So I'm designing comp plans for the end result. I'm designing comp plans that encourage those activities outside of the necessarily the comp plan. And so when I see components built in like pipeline or I mean, I guess SDRs, let's take SDRs out of the equation. That's all activity-based metrics. But even, I don't know, like CSMs, like customer score, where I'm just like, it has nothing to do with an end result or a completed sale. I don't ever build those into my plans. I despise decelerators. I think they're really demotivating. And I think best practices is moving towards not including decelerators. I think it's pretty rare now, but you have some old school sales comp people who really, really like them. And finance really likes a decelerator as well. They're trying to protect for underperformers, which I understand, but that goes back to our conversation about performance management. Let's manage those underperformers outside of the sales compensation plan and focus on building plans for our performers and top performers, you know? So yeah, I hate decelerators. You'll never see a decelerator in mine.
Yeah. And so, okay. So, I mean, this is where it makes it harder to fund the top performers, right?
Yep.
With the plan. But I agree with your approach of like, I've seen company cultures where if you don't hit quota attainment like 2 years in a row, you're just out. And creating that type of culture is, and again, that cannot apply to everyone. And there's all kinds of other like elements of how you want to think about performance management. That's just one philosophy, one approach. But to me, there are a variety of ways to touch on it. I think we're aligned on the sales activity, but I have a slightly different take. Obviously, for us, we kind of made a bet and an investment in acquiring a sales activity and sales process company where, to me, I think that the activity-based incentives is very, I agree with everything you said, but that's because we don't have the data, or most companies don't have the data to actually do it right. And back to the kind of consumption base, if you don't do it right, it's a disaster. Like, yeah, I'm measuring you on something that really should be like, well, one, I'm measuring on something with the right data. It's just you're either gonna game it or it's not gonna produce the right results.
If you're
Those are
measuring
right data.
or someone can inflate
Exactly.
themselves, that's where I have an issue. And a lot of the data around activity-based metrics have the potential for that to happen. So that's where the risk is, and that's why I really don't like using it. But I agree, if the data is strong and you feel confident in that, sure.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I don't think you compensate on activity. Like my perspective on this is like, I'm going to pay you your commission rate on a deal, but if you do these 5 steps that are really important to the customer, you should make more than the rep that doesn't do it but gets the same deal across the line.
I see. Yep.
And so to me, I'm like, but it's almost impossible to actually track that today in the systems, which is okay. So then the moment you include activity, like pipeline build, very risky. What is good pipeline? How do you, like until we're so confident in a system like managed way, what that looks like, it's, yeah, again, outside of SDR role. And by the way, that's a whole other topic we could spend like hours on of like what happens to sales comp when you factor in AI for SDRs, right?
That's something obviously top of mind. My goal, to be honest, is to automate myself out of a job at some point. And so I'm a big proponent of sales compensation tools, any tools that can help with that. I've implemented many tools within sales compensation, and I think any organization that's not utilizing that, obviously startups, different story. If you can manage that manually, great. But at some point, you need to be able to scale and automate things.
For sure.
And it just helps building trust with the sales organization as well. So every single company I've worked at, if we don't have a comp tool in place, I'm implementing one. And if it's terrible, I'm implementing a new one.
100%. Yeah, it's a critical system. Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, well, so there's 2 questions I ask kind of every episode, and I think, to me, it's a community, it's a profession. There's a lot of knowledge that we can get and share back. So obviously, first, thank you for, joining us today and sharing your experience, and hopefully it helps benefit. I think there's tremendous insights that you've already, provided. So hopefully very actionable that people can take and apply to their process today. So in the world of revenue or sales ops slash sales comp, who would you most like to, take out to lunch, and what would you want to talk about?
Good question. This was going to be personal to me, I guess. So I had a manager, gosh, it's been years now. Her name's Quinn Brady, one of the best managers I've ever had. Haven't spoken to her in a while, and that's truly just our lives are, diverging. But yeah, I would love to have lunch with her and like pick back up where we left off. I think she's a very inspiring RevOps manager and I learned a lot from her, not only within sales compensation, but RevOps in general and really how to navigate these political landscapes. She was really, really good at that. And so, yeah, I don't know. Maybe she'll shout out to her. Would love to have lunch, catch up.
Yeah. Hey, it's funny how life just like you fly by and then
Yeah,
you wake up.
I realize one of our connections I see every now and then, and I realize I'm like, wow, it's been like probably 3 years since I've talked with her. So yeah,
Yeah.
love to.
Hey, oh, that's great. I love that. I love this. So okay, so the final question, what's a sales comp management book that you think the audiences should be, should check out, should look into? And I clarified this earlier, right? To me, a sales like, something that helps, a book or a resource that helps with sales comp doesn't even have to be about sales comp at all. Like I find sometimes I'll read a sci-fi book and it gives me an idea, like totally unrelated, but it just inspires something in me. So I don't know if there's something that resonates there for you.
Yeah, I'll be the first to admit I don't read books that are necessarily sales compensation forward. I do a lot of work in my day to day that is involved with that. So I'm usually reading for myself outside of, those hours. But I'd say a book that I read recently that I'm actually just restarted. I don't typically read books again after I read it, but this one was that good. And it's just a nice reminder. It's called Stolen Focus. And it's around just how all of these digital pieces of our lives are kind of taking our focus away from what's really important. And I always need a gentle reminder. I think everyone now at this point we're glued to our phones, we're glued to our computers. I have Slack and email on my phone. And so the workday ends and I'm still getting Slacks and I'm still getting pulled out of the life that I'm trying to live. And, I work so I can live that life. And so I think creating those boundaries, creating those separations, putting your phone down and turning it off every now and then is so healthy. And if you create space from your work, I think ideas will actually start flowing to you easier because those times when I'm on vacation or I'm taking time off and haven't been thinking about this for a few days, I'll be like falling asleep in bed and I'll have something come to my mind that I had never thought about before. And I'm like really excited about it. And I don't think that that would have happened if I was glued to my phone and constantly thinking about that. So create space.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. And I think it's so relevant to sales comp because there's always fires. There's always things. So it's finding that space to think through. And you guys, I find it's like sometimes I agree, like you're smarter when you're not in it and you're just kind of the periphery of your brain is thinking about stuff in the background. So it's very still in focus, right?
Yep. Still in focus. Look it up.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, Saxton, this is absolutely wonderful. I really enjoyed the conversation. And again, thank you for giving back to the community, being a part of the show.
Thanks for having me. I really enjoyed this and have me back anytime. I always love doing these.
We'll have to, maybe let's connect in a year or two and pick up where sales activity incentives are.
There we go. Maybe my mind has changed.
Yeah, exactly. Awesome. Well, thank you. Thank you again.
Thank you, Bill.
The Sales Competition Show is brought to you by Forma AI, the sales performance management platform that fully integrates sales planning with rapid, scalable incentive compensation management. Our data platform brings together how you can plan and manage the entire lifecycle of territories, quotas, and incentives. With global customers like Autodesk, Stryker, and Hootsuite, we enable go-to-market teams to plan and deploy even the most complex SPM strategies at speed, taking you from idea to execution instantly. To learn more about Forma AI, visit our website at forma.ai. Hit the subscribe button and find more episodes of the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. Thanks for tuning in.